Hey everyone, and welcome to the ESA cast. I'm Reed.
I am Rad.
And this is our first episode. Happy first episode, Rad.
Yeah, thanks, man. Happy first episode to you. To our listeners, we just want to let you know that this is a new thing that we're doing. This is our first episode. So our goal is to let you get to know these people a little bit better, to hear their stories, to find out how they ended up working in the video game industry and the kinds of things they're working on and the issues that are important to them.
And that's right, Rad. We have a great first episode lined up for you guys today. What we have is Andre Thomas from Triseum down at Texas A&M University. He is a very passionate game-based learning advocate, and he has more than 20 years of CGI production in the film industry with movies such as Independence Day, Con Air, Men in Black. He even did a Bond film, Tomorrow Never Dies. He also was the head of graphics for EA Sports' football franchises, including NCAA head coach, NFL Tour, and Madden, which is the longest running and most successful sports franchise in the video game industry.
So we had a really great interview with him. I think we asked him some really great questions. We got some good stuff about what it was like to work in the AAA industry, and we asked him some fun questions about Oregon Trail. But we don't want to spoil it for you, so without further ado, here's Andre Thomas. And we are here with Andre Thomas, CEO of Triseum. Andre, thank you very much for coming on the podcast.
Yeah, I'm really excited to be here today.
Tell us a little bit about what Triseum is and what sort of games and entertainment options you guys make.
Yeah, so Triseum is a spin-off company from the Life Lab at Texas A&M.
Interesting. Okay, so can you tell us, how did the formation of the company come about, and why go into educational games when you clearly have a background in sort of Hollywood and AAA development? Was this something that you had to think about for a long time, or did you sort of always know you wanted to do that? Or
Yeah, absolutely. I've started working on computers and computer games when I was 13. As a teenager, I built my first computer and created the first graphics and game, and it was still monochrome, and animation wasn't really existent yet, and that was really exciting. Always being involved in education in one form or another, either teaching on the side, advising students or universities or schools to create educational games, because I really believe outside of a one-on-one experience with a teacher, more powerful than games for learning and for the learning environment. And we see that. I mean, the longest that's still for sale today, 45 years later, which came out a year before Pong came out, is Oregon Trail. A game that after so many years is still out there and being successful. And there's several other examples.
Yeah, Oregon Trail is such a great example of an education game that never felt like an educational game. Like, I remember playing Oregon Trail when I was a kid on Apple IIe, and we always had a choice between like Math Blaster or Oregon Trail when we were in computer class, and I always defaulted to Oregon Trail. I don't think I was alone in that. I think a lot of people appreciated that game.
No, growing up, I'm just a little bit outside Rad's generation, and I grew up with the Oregon Trail as well, and I know that when I had the choice between a game like Math Blaster or Oregon Trail, I always chose the Oregon Trail. But I mean, now that we're talking about the Oregon Trail, I've got to ask, did you try to ford the river at every occasion like so many other of my peers did?
So unfortunately, when I went to school, because I went to school in Germany, and I grew up in Germany, in East Germany, we didn't have access to computers or games. I never had the luxury or privilege of playing Oregon Trail. So I can't actually answer that question, unfortunately.
Well, Andre, if you ever come to ESA headquarters, we will hook up an old Apple IIe for you, and you can die repeatedly trying to ford the river.
Stream that is our weekly stream. Andre Thomas in the ESA cast plays Oregon Trail
and dies repeatedly.
But I think that's interesting. You mentioned, where did you grow up in Germany, and sort of how did that growing up in Germany and growing up in classrooms where maybe technology wasn't readily available or wasn't seen as vital influence what you're doing now, where you're essentially advocating for technology in the classroom?
I grew up in East Germany, and technology was really not pervasive. I mean, my stepfather actually had me learn being a tool and die maker, because he felt like computers are just a fad, and that's not you will never make a living, working with the computers. Today he feels differently. In terms of technology in the classroom, or it's not really technology, it's just a means to an end, but it's all about games. And if you think about education for the last 200 something years in the Western world, when we start educating children, we start in kindergarten. And children learn through play. However, we then decide something happens, and it's now, instead of playing a game in games, we put children in rows and have a stage on the stage. Well, something happens when children turn 18, because now they can go to university, 200 of them in rows, looking down or looking up to the stage to a teacher, and we consider that very effective. Why should learning not be fun? It's not just about computer games, it could be board games, it could be card games, all kinds of things. And learning should be fun for everybody instead of being a grind, in my opinion.
As a teacher yourself, what sort of role do you see games playing in the classroom?
Great question. Well, I believe games should be the center of the classroom. And instead of being a supplementary material or something you do as a homework, games should be really the center, the focus, and everything else. And then there's multiple reasons for that, because I'm allowed to fail as often as I like, and without being ostracized or getting publicly F. I can try different things in a game, and I'm having fun. And we know failure is really the best teacher. Experimenting and trying out different things and being able to talk to others about what I'm doing. A textbook really doesn't afford that kind of agency. At Texas A&M last fall, we actually took this idea to the next step and created the first game-based course. Can earn college credit for playing a video game. It was so successful that now in the spring we have 3 courses on offer.
So do you think that, considering what you just told us about, a game-based course where the game is now sort of the centerpiece of the course, do you think that we'll get to a place where players won't be able to tell the difference between like a AAA game and a quote educational game, or are we already there?
Yes, so that's a great question. I mean, ultimately, that's what we're trying to do. If you look at our games, we're trying to deliver games that look and feel like a game that Ubisoft, Activision, EA would produce. A AAA game. I don't have anywhere near the budget to create the kind of gaming experience. So we have to still deliver something that looks and feels like. And we had actually an executive from EA looking at our games and saying, wow, these are the kind of games that EA would produce.
So as a follow-up to that, I've been dealing with educational game developers and the educational game sort of scene and market here in DC for a couple of years now. And one thing that I've noticed is a shifting attitude towards education games, because for a long time, even the developers, it seemed like, who were making the education games, they felt almost kind of dirty if the game was too fun, right? It felt like that if the student's having too much fun, then maybe they're not learning. And I think that finally that attitude has sort of just dissipated, and everyone is okay with learning games actually being fun instead of the chocolate covered broccoli approach. What do you think drove that evolution? Like, how do you think that happened? What took people getting comfortable with educational games as tools?
I don't know. It's really difficult to say, because if you look at the evolution of educational games, they were out before entertainment games came out. I mean, Pong is considered the birth of the video game industry, yet a year earlier, Oregon Trail came out. And the military used, back in the 50s and 60s, games and simulations for training and education. That was actually the first use of games was for education. Towards entertainment. And very early on, we had companies very successful, Oregon Trail, Carmen San Diego, in the educational realm, teetered off for various kinds of reasons. And I feel like there was a lull in classrooms, teachers, and so on, where it wasn't really as much used anymore. But over the last few years, what I'm seeing is more and more teachers in the classroom, they're seeing the power of games in the classroom. And it's, people start to understand that maybe having 20 kids sit in a row for 45 minutes silently and a sage on the stage is not the most effective way of teaching.
Following up on that, and I think you make a great point about people look at games and they go, wait, no, this is fun, this isn't learning, this isn't education. How do you, as a teacher and as at the head of a program like Texas A&M, where you have lots of parents dropping their kids off to go to school, to leave home, and to find a career, how do you explain to them how you're going to be teaching them game design, or how this is actually a very lucrative career, or that there is a massive opportunity here, and that this is not just video games. This is not just learning CGI to make cool explosions. It can be used in so many practical ways than just a video game, and also in education in video games.
First, I find still today many parents and students, actually, even though we students are 97% of our students play games 4 hours or more every week, right? And yet there's still plenty of them come to school and say, oh, a living in video games? There's a career path. So it's like, so that's the first hurdle to overcome. It's like, yes, it is. And it's really good. And the games industry is bigger than music, movies, and TV combined. So why wouldn't you go? The other thing, what I usually tend to do is share with students and parents that they got to think of games spectrum. For me, games is another medium. Games are not just Candy Crush, shooter. Games are all kinds. There are games for health, games for entertainment, games for political causes, documentary games, learning games. I mean, you name it, the spectrum of games is just as deep as a spectrum of books. If somebody says, well, you can't use games, it's like, oh, so you're saying we can't use books? Because we have, sci-fi novels all the way to classical literature and reference books and cookbooks and textbooks and anything in between. Same as the gaming landscape, and many people don't understand it or even get they view games as one little thing. It may represent a big, so much variety out there, and most folks don't, parents and students don't even know or are aware of it.
So it's interesting that you mentioned books because, for many, many, many years, science fiction would never have been taught in a classroom, right? And kids would never have gotten science fiction like Asimov on a summer reading list. Now that's routine. It just took it took some time for that to happen. I think people just had to become comfortable with the subject matter. So that's a very interesting comparison that you make.
I tend to make an argument. When Twain wrote Huckleberry Finn, he did not write it as a textbook. It was written to entertain people. He didn't sit there, oh, let me write a book that's going to be used in schools by teachers and students. Yet it's generally accepted as classical literature that has to be read by students, as a textbook. Should that not be the same case for games?
One thing I wanted to bring up, Andre, was just sort of, you've had a long history working with Electronic Arts on their football franchises, the NCAA head coach, the NFL tour, in Madden, and kind of going back to what Brad was saying, is what are some of those lessons you have learned from working on those franchises, working on teams as large as AAA games, particularly with Electronic Arts and B? What are some of the lessons you take away from that experience of working at one of the highest echelons of the video game industry?
I learned so much working at EA and overseeing the graphics for the football games. One of the key things a lot of people forget that was astounding to me. First, I learned football from playing a video game. It's coming from Germany. Football for us is soccer, not so much American football. So everything I know about American football, I learned from a video game. But every year Madden or NCAA comes out, there's nothing left on the table. So everything is being put into the game to deliver a better experience for the players. Following year, if I have a bucket that's full, how am I going to top that off? first I'm going to have to take something out of the bucket to put something new into the bucket. See, is consoles are really not changing year over year. So at the tail end, I mean, you working on hardware that may be 5 or 7 years old and still trying to create products that are, wowing audiences, that are engaging, that are fun. Really difficult. So it becomes a collaborative beast, so to speak, between optimization, creativity, the engineers, the artists, and the designers. How do we craft something within the means to make that happen? Huge learning experience. Because you think you have large teams and it's relatively easy because you do. It really isn't. It's incredibly difficult journey. The other thing I've learned that graphics sell a product, but they don't keep a product on the shelves. But still today, I wouldn't say graphics is the most important thing, but it's the thing that gets people first into the door. But then you have to deliver something on the user experience, and graphics really just becomes a means to an end.
It's interesting that you say that because ESA does research on that every year, and we ask gamers, what influences your decision to purchase a game? And graphics is on the list, of course, but I don't think I've ever seen it as number one. Usually number one is like interesting story or premise, right? Or the gameplay mechanics. Yeah, or whether or not it's multiplayer, or if is this game a sequel to a game I've played before, which for sports games it's probably a huge draw for a lot of people because they come to know sort of the Madden brand and they expect certain things out of it and they go back every year. But it's interesting that you say that because we see the same thing in our research. Graphics are important, but they're not in the minds of many gamers the most important thing.
It's really because all of the other things you mentioned, you can't really know about them unless you actually play the game. Okay, what is the story? How engaging is it? What's the mechanic? Now, somebody can tell me about it versus the graphics. I can just look at a trailer and I get a sense for that. Sell, but they don't keep you on the shelf. They're not gonna keep you alive. However, having said that, if you shortcut on the graphics, it will also hurt you, in my opinion. So you can't neglect the graphics. They still have to be of quality. Okay, well, we just do pretty trailer and then never mind the graphics, but everything else is there. I don't think gamers will tolerate that either. They come to expect a certain production quality.
So one thing I wanted to ask about is you weren't just at EA doing the head of graphics. You also were at Hollywood and had worked on films such as Men in Black, Con Air, Independence Day, Tomorrow Never Dies. So you've worked with the Bond franchise. I've got to ask is what's the biggest difference between transitioning from doing CGI for action heroes like James Bond and then doing graphics for Tom Brady and EA and Madden? And what sort of is the biggest change or challenge in creating a set piece for a film as opposed to, or a CGI piece for a film as opposed to creating one for a video game?
But the number one thing is in a film, see one angle and you only see what the director of the movie wants you to see. I can't, let's take a Bond movie. I can't take a scene and start walking around in that scene and interacting with it. So it gives me a lot of freedom on the graphic side to cheat. The background may just be fake. It may just be comped in there because the viewers will never ever get close enough. Versus in a game, I don't know what a gamer is gonna do. Being a gamer myself, the first thing I try to do is try to break the game and try to find the bugs and glitches in the game. So I will do things the designers, haven't expected. And I know many gamers they do. And so as a designer, as a creator of games, I don't know where my player is gonna go. I don't know what they're gonna see And we all know once you get the game out, they're gonna find our players find so many more glitches and bugs than we ever could. That's the biggest difference. Um, the movies versus games, because you really have to create the entire world.
I know that for a fact because as a lifelong gamer, when a game tells me I can't do something or that this is a place you cannot go, I will probably spend about 10 or 15 minutes trying to figure out how to get there anyway. So that's always fun to hear from game devs and game creators. We really appreciate the time. We've got a few more questions here for you. They're a little more rapid fire and also, as Rad says, a little bit unfair because, I'll let him explain that.
Yeah, so I love asking this question, and I call it the most unfair question in the world, and we ask it at E3 when we do our surveys on the show floor. So I want to know what your favorite game is, and there's a bunch of caveats here. You can't say a franchise. You can't say, oh, well, I've got a couple of games. You have to pick one game that's your absolute favorite, and you can't think about it for too long. Go.
Talos Principle.
Ooh. Why?
It didn't used to be, and I've only recently discovered it. It is so well executed from a design perspective, the way it's crafted, and it really engages you. You want to keep going and want to solve the next puzzle. I think it actually tops Portal, in my opinion. And Portal is a great game, both of them, and also the graphics are just stunning. And if you really look closely, you can see how they really created a beautiful world with very, very few resources and very clever use of reusing what's that. I don't know the team behind it. I don't know how many people worked on it, but today, right now, Talos Principle is my favorite game.
So what sort of games do you like to play just on your own when you're lounging around the house, or maybe you're done teaching at Texas A&M and you just need to relax? Are you loading up Madden at all, or is it,
I love sports games. I love FIFA. I used to really love the Tiger Woods games. Unfortunately, they're not out anymore. Madden. Hockey is a little bit hard for me. I love the sport, but the game is somewhat challenging. I love Age of Empires, Civilization, those kind of strategy games, and then of course puzzle games like Portal, Talos Principle, and then alternatives like Dear Esther, of Two Brothers.
What about, do you have any fierce video game rivalries? Like I know my brother and I have a pretty intense Madden rivalry growing up. I know Rad has a Street Fighter rivalry with his brother that's involves some interesting moments.
A rivalry that I win all the time, I should point out.
Yes, I do. And it's Bomberman.
Oh, Bomberman.
Ooh. Do you have any rivalries with your students? Do you get to play games much with your students at all at Texas A&M?
Fortunately, I don't get to play a bunch of games with my students, but I get to play with my son. And so my biggest rival is my son. And unfortunately, he kicks my behind.
He's at the age where you're not letting him win. He's actually just beating you.
Yeah, that's important.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, excellent. Well, I think we've got one more question each for each other. I've got to ask it, as you worked on Con Air, I got to know, did you ever get to do any CGI on Nicolas Cage's face or for Nicolas Cage, or was it all explosions and the exteriors of the plane and stuff like that? If we were watching Con Air, what would we be able to say, like, oh, Andre Thomas did that? Oh, sorry. So I was saying, if I wanted to ask you, since your film credits included Con Air, and that's a one that's pretty popular with people and gamers, and they seem to love Nicolas Cage. Curious if you ever got to do any CGI for Nick Cage, or if I was watching Con Air or Independence Day, if you would be able to say, like, oh yeah, that's the scene Andre Thomas did. Like, yeah, he did the White House getting blown up by the alien ship, you know?
Yes, that's a great question. I work for a small subcontractor that we contracted for the big effects houses. So there isn't one scene where I can say, oh, that's me. I've created that. Or I was solely. So most of my work is helping others make it look good. The tunnel sequence in Men in Black, the first one, as a driving through. There's a lot of cleanup, getting rid of things, wires and so on.
Last question for you. You mentioned you play a lot of sports games. Are you still, or have you been a Madden player? And if so, and even if you're not necessarily a player, What do you like about the direction that the game has gone? I mean, what do you think about? I mean, it's been around for so long now. When you look back at it as a franchise, what do you think?
Yeah, they're adding stuff like story mode these days, which was very interesting and fun. And just it's really curious to see how far Madden has gone and talk to someone who's been a part of that evolution of Madden.
Yeah, and the story mode has been very well received.
I know I'm not surprised. I mean, Mike and his team, Mike Young and his team has done a fantastic job, and I know he's been trying to do that for the longest time. And one thing we always talked about. Story is so important in games, equally as the mechanics. People forget about that. If you listen or watch sports on television and you turn the volume off, is it still as exciting? Because even watching the Super Bowl, the playoffs or any game on TV, pick your favorite sport, you hear the commentators, they're telling the story. Dynamic story that's unfolding right in front of you, and ultimately the pinnacle in storytelling, and it's in a sports game. And because I don't know if you traded your quarterback last night to another team and he had an accident, but today in the game, the commentators are talking about that and crafting that narrative. Very powerful. And I know one day we'll really get to this fully dynamic, immersive storytelling, and what Mike and his team, what Madden has done this year, I mean, it's just incredible. I think that's just the start of what we're going to see evolving in terms of story mode and storytelling in games.
Well, listen, Andre, we're going to wrap this up, but thank you very much for coming on the podcast, especially our first episode. It was really a pleasure to get to ask you some of these questions, and thank you for. I can tell. I hope we can tell that you put a lot of thought into your answers, which we sincerely appreciate.
I just want you to come up to DC now so we can play Madden against each other, and I can try to teach you a few things about NHL, because that's my game. That's my jam.
Yeah, NHL is Reed's jam, definitely.
We really appreciate you joining us and helping us launch the first episode of our podcast. So.
Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Thanks again to Andre Thomas for joining us. That was a great interview. I really loved hearing about his upbringing from Germany, then coming to America and as a teenager learning to develop games, and really his path to the AAA and film industry from humble beginnings.
Yeah, what was really interesting to me was he kind of put us in our place with the Oregon Trail thing. You sort of take for granted that everyone has the same or similar experiences as you do, especially, when you talk about the video game industry, because everyone is such a fan. But he didn't play it he just didn't play it when he was younger, but he can still relate to it. So I thought that was really interesting that, he corrected our assumption there, and I'm happy that he did, because it makes you sit back and think, hey, maybe not everybody has the same experience that I have.
Yeah, and thank you again, Andre, for joining us. On to some of the trending news of the past month. Wanted to get started on some of that. Rad, what you got for us?
Yeah, so absolutely. You might have seen in the news, NPD just released some numbers in conjunction with ESA. $36 billion video game industry last year, wrapping up in 2017, up 18% from the year before. That's huge, man.
We knew the numbers were going to be up. I didn't think it was going to be that up.
I was surprised by 18%. I think that's terrific. So good job, everybody.
Speaking of things that really captured people's attention, the Overwatch League got started in the past month here, and they had their opening night. They had 400,000 viewers for their first match. They have 3 undefeated teams still in the league at the moment. So there's some pretty good parity. You're looking at the Seoul Dynasty, the New York Excelsior, and the London Spitfire, all currently undefeated. And this was really cool to me because I've always been a fan of esports. I remember growing up watching Brood War and the Korean esports players. So to see esports getting this sort of ESPN treatment, and also what I really like is the city format, where it's not just teams that are sponsored by companies or by investors, but this is actually giving some geographic location of the teams and some, someone you could root for.
Right. I think that's the key, because, if you look at, at least for America, if you look at the way sports teams are broken down, what really drives attendance and interest is geographic location, and having a common team you can root around based on where you live. So congratulations to them. It looks like it was a huge success.
Right, and your Philadelphia Fusion are 2-2, so you're gonna have to get on that bandwagon.
That's okay. We'll be in the Super Bowl.
Yeah,
right.
And for me, there's no team for DC yet, so I'm currently looking at these 12 teams and thinking about who am I going to bandwagon for the first season of the Overwatch League. But there's also some more game news that kind of was dropped and really got people excited.
Next item on the list for me, man, I am stoked about Dark Souls remaster. Mm-hmm. I am a massive, stupidly over-the-top Dark Souls fan. I think From Software at this point could make a dating simulator, and I would buy it. I will buy anything that those guys make, including a remaster of Dark Souls. I'm really excited for it. And I'm also excited. I'm excited for other people to get a chance to play this game like on the Switch. Mm-hmm. I think that's great because the game's going to come to a whole different group of people who might not otherwise have played it. So I'm really looking forward to it, man. I'm excited.
Yeah, having it on the Switch is going to be fantastic. And it makes me think about being in Dulles Airport and seeing people playing their Switches and them making like grimaces, and I'll know exactly what game they're playing. Yeah. And so it's just a really cool news item and community that will be receiving this game. This is not always normally the type of game you see on a Nintendo system, and it's coming.
Yeah, so speaking of Nintendo.
Mm-hmm, yes, Nintendo had some big news in themselves. They had a direct, and they announced Nintendo Labo, which is a do-it-yourself cardboard accessories pack for the Nintendo Switch, and it's really unique. They're calling the items that you can make with cardboard Toy-Cons. It follows the similar path of toy video game peripherals, and the idea is there are these cardboard housing boxes you can make that look like an RC card, a robot, a house, a piano, a full functioning piano. There's also one that's a fishing rod, and you can play games using these cardboard controllers to enhance your experience playing the game.
Yeah, and I have to say that if this was some other company besides Nintendo, I'd be like, huh? Or, I'm excited. They especially lately really been coming up with fantastically creative ideas, and people just get excited for them.
Yeah, this
is year. One of those. So I don't think there should be doubt in anyone's mind that this is going to be a good time.
Yeah, this is just a fantastic year for these guys, and I think that Nintendo has something really special here. It's very clearly aimed at people who want to do DIY things with their video games or children. I know I'm very interested in seeing what can be done with it. It makes me wonder what more you can do with cardboard, or what other ideas for controllers have been kind of left on the table for later that weren't really the ones that they were going to go out to launch with. It sounds like there's going to be 3 different cardboard packs to start out with. They're going to cost around $70 each, and we'll be seeing those more towards April and the summer. Thank you so much again for tuning in. We'll leave you, and we'll give you some details about our next show on our social media accounts.